Hi, this is Steve Rigolosi, and today on Forgotten Mysteries, I have something interesting for you. Well, they're all interesting, right? In one way or another. But more specifically, I have The Bait by Dorothy Uhnak. And this is copyright 1968 by Simon & Schuster and their Inner Sanctum imprint. One fun fact about this book is that it won the Edgar for first best novel in 1968, and it was tied with another book that I have, this one right here, called Silver Street by E. Richard Johnson. And I have not read this one yet, but I will pretty soon, and then I think it'll be fun to sort of compare and contrast this book with the Uhnak book. But for now, I'm going to focus on The Bait by Dorothy Uhnak. And I think I'm pronouncing her last name correctly. I'm not sure. I've never heard it said. I guess it could be Uhnak or something else, but Uhnak sounds right to me, so let's go with it. So there's a lot of interesting things to say about Dorothy Uhnak. I first came to her late in her career and read a couple of her later books, which I thought were great. She has one, False Witness, that I recommend highly. That is a great book. And then there was another one called Victims that's sort of based on the Kitty Genovese story. And I like that one a lot too. But for this one, I went back to, the Forgotten Mystery from the 60s. And the publication story behind this book is that prior to this novel, Dorothy had written a nonfiction book called Policewoman about her experiences as a woman in the New York City Police Department. So she was really sort of a trailblazer in terms of being a woman in law enforcement and writing about crime from a woman police officer's perspective. Of course, we've had female sleuths for a long time, Miss Marple and so forth, but Dorothy really had the street cred of having been a New York City police officer. And she turned that into fiction writing. Excuse me. There's a picture of her back here. I'd like you to see it because I think whoever took this picture must be a very fine photographer, because I feel like from this photo, I almost know her. She seems to me like a sort of a soulful, introspective, maybe slightly insecure and sensitive person. And of course, how can you tell all that from a photo? But this is the feeling that I got from her photo. And I'll have some critical things to say about this book, which is why I only review books here by authors who are no longer with us, because this picture just made me think that Dorothy Uhnak was such a kind soul that I would have hated to say anything negative or critical about the book. But I guess I do have that ability now that she is no longer with us to be, the critic that I like to be regarding the books that I read. So, the basic story here in this book is really pretty easy to suss out from the title. It revolves around a woman detective in New York City. Her name is Christy Opera. It's spelled O-P-A-R-A. Everybody thinks it's pronounced Opera. That's what it looks like, but that is not what it sounds like. And interestingly, the pronunciation of her last name plays a role in the plot, a pretty major role, which I thought was interesting. In essence, there is a killer of young women stalking the streets of New York City, and Christie has to serve as the bait to try to get him. So, pros, Pros, positives first. I think that Uhnak's ability to describe New York City and its people and its culture and its quirks and its joys and its sorrows is superb. There are so many set pieces in here where she just describes a subway station, a crowded street. There's a scene of one of the officers haggling with a vendor over price and the sort of psychological dynamics that go along with that. And every time I got to one of these scenes, I felt like I was there. I mean, everything's so closely observed. And things that, if you've spent any time in New York or a New Yorker, you feel like this is not really fiction. It's nonfiction, and then it's got the city and its people down so closely and so beautifully. Some of the language, some of the portrayals, I think would be considered a little bit outdated or stereotypical. But Uhnak does not mean them that way. It's more almost reportorial in that she is reporting on what she sees, and she has a great eye. Another thing that I really liked is that she gets the nuances of the situation that her lead character, Christie, Oprah, is in, which is that she is the only woman detective in a squad. And this is the late 60s, so, it was before, squads became more open to different types of people, although there is a black man on the squad and a Jewish man. So the squad is kind of a microcosm of the many cultures of New York City. And so she wants to be successful. She's a widow with a young child. Her husband had been in the police force too. He died in the line of duty. And so she really wants to do a good job. She wants to make a name for herself. And that is part of what drives her. And it was interesting to me to see how, the sexist dynamics that play out will probably make some readers crazy because it will take them back to a time where that kind of behavior was considered okay or all in good fun. But what Uhnak does that I find very effective is that she basically puts Christie into a situation where she's new and she's going into this closed community of her detective squad. And as the new person, of course, she is going to be hazed, right? As we are all hazed at some point in our life over something. I remember when I started high school, I was terrified of being hazed on the bus. I was losing sleep, ready to flee the country so that I wouldn't have to get on the bus to high school. And one of my uncles just sat me down and said, "You're going to be hazed. Get over it. You'll live. It's a rite of passage." And I was very at my righteous indignation about that. Why do these people think that they have the right to haze the younger people? It's not right. It's not fair. My uncle said, "This is life, kid. Get used to it." Now, this is not to make light of some of these really horrible hazing incidents where people have died. But the fact that, when you're new to something, especially kind of like a masculine pursuit, where they're all dudes who crack wise all the time, there's going to be some hazing and some joking and some, just that kind of sort of horseplay. And Christie, even though she feels like she is not totally accepted or appreciated because she's the token girl, and I use the word girl purposefully because that's what she is often called in the book, she has a few insights where her leader, her chief, says to her, well, do you think because you're a woman, that means you don't have to go through what all the other guys in the department went through? You know, they all went through this sort of hazing period. The word hazing is never used, but you know what I mean. And so why do you think that you should not be treated the same way as everybody else? And I found that interesting because the way everybody else is treated, that was pretty badly too. So it's like, you know, you can be a woman or black or a member of any other, non-majority group and still have to go through what everybody else goes through to be part of this sort of closed society or whatever you want to call it. I thought that was really interesting the way she did that. So those are two things that I liked about the book. But there are quite a few things about it that I didn't like, and I feel like I need to be quite critical of. The first is that it's almost not a novel. The plot, such as it is, does not really kick into gear until, I want to say, about 60% of the book. So for the first 120 pages or so, you're seeing these interesting New York set pieces and some interesting personal dynamics are being set up, but there's no plot to speak of. There's a sort of a minor crime at the beginning, whatever, but there's nothing to drive the story forward. And I think that's a real flaw in this book. You know, it's not a day in a life of a police officer nonfiction. It's supposed to be fiction, a novel. It's supposed to have a story, and the story is not strong. And even when it does get into the bait part towards the end of the book, it's just nothing you haven't seen before. There's not a lot of narrative drive. It just kind of all ends by kind of fizzling out. And then it ends on sort of a strange note. So a real problem with this book is that there's no suspense. It's a little hard to keep reading it because you're jonesing, you're chomping at the bit for story, and it's not there. A second criticism I have is that the author does what we now dismissively call head hopping, where you'll be in a chapter that is mostly from Christie's viewpoint, and all of a sudden you get into the minds of the other people who are in that room. Literature majors would call that third person omniscient. And I guess so many books are not written this way anymore that it is disconcerting to be hopping around from one person to another. And it sort of loses the focus on Christie, which leads me to a third criticism, which is that I just feel that she is rather a flat, not particularly interesting character. She's curiously undeveloped, that we know so little about her and her likes and her dislikes. We know a little bit about her family life. We know that she has a son. We know that she wants to be a good cop, but there's just not a lot of heft there. You keep waiting to learn more about Christie, who's supposed to be this great and strong heroine. And she really, I don't want to say she isn't really a good heroine, but she is a little wishy-washy is not the right word. I mean, you just have to read the book. She's not, to me, she doesn't have the makings of a series character, because the author doesn't really succeed in making you root for her or want to read more about her. Of course, you want her to end happily because she puts herself in a situation of danger. And, you want her to be fine. But I know that there are 2 more books in this series, and this first one did not make me want to read the other 2 books in the series, which I have a fun fact about that. So it turns out that the 70s TV show Get Christie Love, sort of a blaxploitation TV series, is based on this series about Christie Opera. They took Christie Opera, who is Greek by birth, and turned her into Christie Love, a black woman, for this TV series that lasted only 1 season. So I kind of remember watching that series when I was a kid. I don't remember much about it, but I've got to go back somewhere and find a few episodes of that because I'm curious as to what it was all about. Another sort of strange thing about this book is that there's some really uncomfortable moments between Christie and her boss, Casey Reardon, that are quasi-flirty, but with a dark edge, a sexist edge. You don't really know how Christie feels about this, whether she likes it or doesn't like it. If there's a mutual attraction going on, which I think there can be a case made for that, or whether Casey Reardon is really dangerously on the edge of sexual harassment. The author can't seem to make up her mind about this. And maybe it's because she didn't know herself. Maybe she recognized that it's, I might get in trouble for what I'm about to say, but, in matters of flirtation, it's hard to know, right, where, whether someone is receiving it well or not. I mean, of course, if they say no or stop it or whatever, of course, point blank that, you're supposed to stop. But, if there's a little winking and a little joking and a little off-color comment here or there and maybe some laughter, is that just 2 people having a fun little flirtation? Or if there's a power differential, is that by definition not kosher, right? Not the right thing to do. And I think a lot of modern readers would say if there's a power differential, you should never, like romance shouldn't be kind of out of the question. Ultimately, though, my main criticism, and it's what stops me from recommending the book, is that it just felt rather labored, as if it was not going anywhere. And then when it did kind of go somewhere, it took too long to get there. I feel like this is very much a first novel by an inexperienced novelist who had to learn more about her craft. And I want to reiterate that she did, because by the time she wrote False Witness and Victims, she was really at the top of her game. And those books are great. So if you want to read Dorothy Uhnak, I recommend starting with one of those and then maybe going back to The Bait as, for a little bit of context or to see the development of a writer and to compare then and now, which is something I enjoy doing. On a sad note, I understand that Dorothy Uhnak was quite ill and took her own life. And so that's sort of a sad ending to what was, I think, a pretty successful and groundbreaking career. So let me close by saying I give major props to Dorothy Uhnak for breaking ground and paving the way for a lot of others. But like a lot of writers, her first book is not the best, and if the publisher gives them the chance, they get better with time, and that was the case here. If anybody disagrees with me or has other comments about this book or other books in the Christie Opera series, please do feel free to leave them here. Thank you for watching, as always, and I will be back the next time I have a mystery that should not be forgotten, or one that should. Thank you. Good night.